To hear more, listen to the podcast. Just search for Hancock and Kelley.
The special counsel investigating President Biden's mishandling of classified documents passes on filing criminal charges against him, but paints a damning portrait of his mental fitness. The report cites 2 days of interviews with the president, during which he struggled to remember things like the year he became vice president under President Obama, and also the year his son Beau died from cancer.
There's some attention paid to some language in the report about my recollection of events. There's even reference that I don't remember when my son died. How in the hell dare he raise that? Frankly, when I was asked the question, I thought to myself, it wasn't any of their damn business.
The report included photos of documents in a flimsy open cardboard box in the garage of Biden's Delaware home. The report says he willfully kept classified material related to the 2009 Afghanistan troop surge while he was vice president, and that he illegally shared classified material with the ghostwriter of his memoir. Nonetheless, the report says jurors could well conclude that Mr. Biden's actions were not intentional and be sympathetic to him as a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Republicans have pounced. In our quote of the week, Illinois Congresswoman Mary Miller, who represents part of the St. Louis area and is a fervent Donald Trump supporter, goes so far as to say, for the safety of our nation, Joe Biden must resign from office. Joe Biden could not remember when he was vice president or basic facts about his life. Michael, during the president's brief remarks and Q&A with the press after the report, he again seemed to struggle to find words.
Yep.
He misspoke, and it seemed to be on full display.
Yeah, it's a lot to tackle here. Number one, the main thing we heard is that the president's not going to be charged with any crime, and I think that's positive. It's quite different than what we saw with Donald Trump. Number two, the report that came out had no redactions. I don't think there's another White House that would have taken the step that the Biden administration did of full transparency. Number three, it put in the spotlight the tact that Donald Trump and many of us witness on a daily basis as it relates to President Biden. We've all watched over the last several years. This isn't the same human being that we saw when he first came onto the national political spectrum. We have a real problem inside the Democratic Party. This is not going to get much better. Joe Biden has some serious issues, and it's permeating not only with Republicans but with Democrats. If Democrats are making the case that Donald Trump is such a threat to democracy, then we owe it to voters to make sure we have an alternative that doesn't leave so many questions in the lurch. And unfortunately, the week that President Biden has had has only perpetuated that narrative, and some might even say validated it for the Trump campaign.
He didn't say gratuitous, but most Democrats are. Was this report just too gratuitous and unfair?
He interviewed the guy.
Hit job, the vice president called it.
He interviewed the guy. This is what happened. It's in a report. It's a 300-page report. You report in a report. What have I been saying for months here, Andy?
That Joe Biden will not be the Democrat nominee.
Ding, ding, ding. In fact, we may have even marked the tape. And I'm telling you, as I sit here today, if the Democrats allow Mr. Tudball, remember Mr. Tudball from the old Carol? If they allow Mr. Tudball to run for re-election, they're going to lose. And I think they know that. We see it. We know it's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. There's going to be more of these events and occurrences over and over again. And if they don't replace him, they're going to lose the White House. And I think they are going to replace him.
And John's glee here is reflective of the problem that the Democrats have. They have an insurrectionist, a person who's indicted on 90 felony counts, that is the standard bearer for their party. This should be a no-brainer election, and likely will be. But we can't be putting this into question. This needs to be dealt with and addressed. And I think the president further hurt his effort with that press conference the other day. And the thing that Democrats have to get through our head is this is not going away. It's going to continue to get worse.
Speaking of the insurrection case, Donald Trump lost in court on his immunity claim. Yeah. He's also claiming that given the decision not to prosecute Joe Biden over federal documents, he should not be prosecuted for his federal documents.
Well, you got two different
boxes found in Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, you got two completely different fact sets here. In Trump's case, he had hundreds of these things. He knew that he had them. He had them moved around when the folks were coming to find them. The obstruction issue with Donald Trump is fundamentally different than what Biden has.
What about it? If you can't prosecute Joe Biden, can you prosecute Donald Trump over documents?
It's completely separate issues, like John says. I mean, the real issue that Donald Trump has is that he defied that subpoena. If any of us defied a subpoena, we'd be sitting in jail right now. He's not sitting in jail because he's a former president, but he is going to be held accountable for defying that subpoena. President Biden didn't do that.
Still to come on Hancock and Kelley, Congress facing huge issues, but getting nothing done on any of them. And the mother of a high school mass shooter going to prison for her son's crimes.